Hello everyone, I am here with Peter and John and I'll let them do a quick intro themselves very shortly. We're here to see AI energy management in action, as it says on the slide. Before we want to go into that, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. So what I really wanted to talk about was feel free to ask questions as we go along. This is very much an opportunity for you to be interactive and to give us an idea of the questions that are burning for you. We're also would like you to rate the webinar before you leave. It just means to make sure that we're getting the right feedback, etc. So I'm Geoff Curran from Energy Live News. I'm your host with the most, or not, as some people might say, but I will be passing you on to the experts, and that's John and Peter. So Peter's from Cambridge University Press and Assessment. John is from Optimal Monitoring. Let me hand you over so they can do a quick intro, and then we'll come back and we'll get started. So Peter, why don't I pass over to you first?
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. So yeah, as you can see on the slide, I'm Peter Lum. I am Head of Environment at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. And in a second, I'll tell you a little bit about what our organisation is and what we do. I will pass over to John.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Jon Slinn. I'm Head of Sales and Business Development for Optimal Monitoring, and I've worked with Peter through all of the early stages of this work and with the wider team on the ongoing work as well.
And he's very happy that you're here, John, because there's some technical stuff he's not sure about, which I think is fantastic, because let's be frank, some of these systems are quite complex and sophisticated, but they also do wonderful things. So the great thing about this is we're going to get into what MRAI has been able to do for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. But before that, Peter's also going to take you through the journey that the company has had in terms of decarbonisation and energy management. And I think this is really intriguing. I've seen some of the slides just to see how much work that they've been going through and how they're still looking to do stuff that will make a difference. So Peter, why don't you talk us through the journey and what differences you're making?
Yeah, sure, will do. So I thought I would start just by introducing, if you haven't heard of Cambridge University Press and Assessment before, just to give you a little bit of background about who we are. So essentially, we date back to the 1500s. Henry VIII granted Cambridge University Press sort of letters patent to publish books. Similarly, Cambridge Assessment, very old organisation dating back to the 1800s. But in 2021, the two organisations merged and formed Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So we're actually a department of the University of Cambridge. So you can see the crest there. That's the Cambridge University crest. But we kind of operate as an organisation and as a business in our own right. And because of the work that we do as an organisation, obviously we are educating people around the world. We're sort of in the cutting edge of science in a lot of areas. So as a leader in global education and publishing and research, the organisation really recognises and kind of understands issues around climate change, environmental challenges, sustainability. And so, you know, we do have a real focus on sustainability as an organisation. And I won't go into really deep detail, but essentially we're a signatory to the UN Global Compact. We do try and embed sort of sustainability into a lot of our work. So you can see the sort of the first three bullets there. We do a lot of work behind the scenes to try and sort of integrate sustainability into our products and services. Now, my role as head of environment, I'm really focused on that last bullet, so reducing the impact of our operations on the planet. And just to talk about what those sort of operations look like, so broadly, sort of get a sense for the scale of our organization. We reach over 100 million learners globally. I think that figure's out of date. I think we might be approaching 7,000 colleagues around the world now. So reasonably sized organization. Obviously, today I'm going to be talking about mainly our sort of energy use. And to give you a sense for the size of our estate, in the UK, we have sort of roughly 5 large offices, 2 pretty big distribution centres / warehouses. We've got a couple of kind of events and conference venues. We have a data centre as well that we own and operate. And we also have the Cambridge University Press bookshop right in the centre of Cambridge. There's a few other sort of smaller properties dotted around, but that's the sort of bulk of our estate.
So you're quite I'm going to butt in, but it sounds like you've got it's actually quite varied as well. It's
Yeah.
not just sometimes you'll come across companies and it's like they're all small offices or they're 3 large offices. You've got quite a varied estate as well.
Yeah, it is, and actually, in those small properties, we also have a few sort of residential properties as well. So yeah, we've got a real sort of variety of different properties. We also have quite a few offices outside the UK, so we are a global organisation. Now, the majority of those are pretty small, and a lot of them are kind of leased and serviced, so we don't own them. So the sort of focus of this presentation is the UK, but we're kind of working to better understand our energy use outside the UK, which I'll come onto at the end of this presentation. And just to briefly touch on, so why are we doing this? Why have we come on to working with MAI? Well, essentially, one of our big environmental targets is a carbon reduction target, as I'm sure many organisations will have. This will probably be familiar to a lot of people on this call, but for those who sort of aren't familiar with the kind of lingo that I'm going to talk about, we measure our emissions in line with the GHG protocol. That sets out 3 scopes of greenhouse gas emissions, and our main target is that we have a target to reduce our scope 1 and 2, so energy related, those ones on the left. Energy related emissions we're aiming to reduce to 0 by 2048. And we have an interim target of a 72% reduction by 2030. So you'll see on the next slide the kind of the steepness of that path is a pretty challenging one to meet. Our target hasn't been signed off by the Science Based Targets Initiative, but we call it Science Based Target Aligned. So we're aiming to align with what the science says we need to do to prevent warming of over 1.5 degrees. We're also doing quite a lot behind the scenes on our scope 3, so our non-energy related emissions. I'm not going to be talking about that today, but obviously, yeah, very, very conscious of that.
I might get you back on to talk about that. That's another webinar in itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I won't go into the detail on that one today. But so to talk about our progress, so this chart on the left tracks our performance on those scope 1 and 2, so the energy related emissions going back to our baseline year, which was 2018-19. And so far, I feel like we've done pretty well. So we've reduced our energy related emissions by 45% in sort of, well, I think it's 6 years now. And you can see on that chart, the pink line is the target line. So every year, we're trying to stay below that pink line. And the scope 1 and 2 emissions, so scope 1, mainly sort of gas, heating fuels, and then the darker color is our sort of electricity related emissions. Now, some of that reduction, to be totally transparent, is because the UK has done a pretty good job at decarbonising the electricity supply. So we can't claim all of that win. Some of it would be helped by wider changes. But on the right there, I've just picked out the difference in our energy use from when we started on this journey to now. So yeah, about 2.1 million kilowatt hours of gas we've reduced, and 3.3 million of electricity. So we've done a pretty good job so far of reducing our energy use as well as reducing our emissions. And just to touch on some of the things that we've done across our estate, so you can see on the top left there, we have a few solar arrays. We've got a couple on our main, the roof of our main buildings, our main offices, sorry. The ground mounted array there you can see was actually installed this year. That's just behind one of our distribution centres. We don't have a huge vehicle fleet, but we've had a couple of vans replaced with electric vehicles. In the top right, you can see, so we had quite a focus on what we call degasification. So we've been switching out gas boilers, LPG boilers for mainly air source heat pumps to make the most of that sort of transition to more sustainable electricity that I was just talking about. In the bottom left there, you can say we also have tried to make sure that when we move offices or when we're refitting offices, they meet high standards for sustainability. Our data center in the middle there is a huge user of energy. So in the last couple of years, we've been trying to make some efficiencies in the energy use on that site, mainly sort of adjusting the air conditioning and partitioning space to make it more efficient. As I'm sure a lot of other organizations have done, we've done quite a lot of lighting replacements. There's a few pictures of some of the lighting replacements we've done. And we also have a few kitchens across our estate, and you can see that's actually our pizza oven. So we replaced our gas. We had a big gas-fired pizza oven, was replaced with an electric one about a year ago. And we've had a few other bits of big kitchen equipment to be replaced from gas to electric as part of that degasification strategy. So we've done quite a lot of projects, and full credit to sort of our hardworking property team who are sort of making all these projects happen behind the scenes. But it's not just these kind of big shiny new things that we've been doing. We also have had a real focus on efficiency and trying to identify efficiencies, and we've had some reasonable successes. So just to pick out 2023, that year we had a real focus on using our building management systems to try and identify reductions in energy use. So a few examples of some of the things we did there. It was fairly simple things like adjusting operating hours. I think particularly post-COVID, people aren't in the office as much as they were, so we tried to better fit the kind of the air handling systems to suit times when people were actually in the office. And there's simple things like making sure that timers for air conditioning were set to go auto off at the end of the day. All those kind of simple housekeeping things, and we had some pretty good success from that. So estimated saved about 100 tons of carbon in 2023 from those changes. Building on that, on 2024, we had a real focus on thermal comfort policy. So we essentially tried to get the temperatures set right across our buildings. We had a real variety in temperature settings. We tried to make things consistent, have a better policy for monitoring temperatures, and a little bit of draft proofing as well for those offices that were a little bit colder. And we had some real big successes from that. So big drops in gas use. We think savings around 80 tons of carbon. So we've had some real good successes from that, kind of looking at our energy use, trying to identify these efficiencies. This is just one slide which kind of gives a high level overview, but actually there's quite a lot of analysis in the background that had to make that happen. And often it was me sitting down with reams of spreadsheets trying to kind of work out from our reports downloaded manually from our building management systems, where can we make efficiencies, and then trying to present that back to property colleagues.
So essentially, that was a really big sigh, Peter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we had some successes, but it was a lot of work in the background to try and get that data and do that analysis and understand where we could make these efficiencies. But we knew there were really big sort of wins to be had, and essentially that's what led to the conversation with optimal monitoring and our project with Emmet AI that we're going to talk about. So it's, I think, around about a year ago we started. Talking to Jon and the team. We kicked off the project around about this time last year. And initially, essentially, we had a lot of conversations about metering, getting metering reporting into the Emma system. So we had to secure agreements with with our utility brokers to get that metering reporting in. Had some technical work, which don't ask me about, but hopefully Jon can talk about sort of getting the BMS and metering talking to the MAI system and getting that.
Told you, Jon.
Yeah, getting that stuff all linked up. But essentially trying to get as much of our metering into the Emma tool so we could use it to identify more energy sort of efficiencies. So we kicked off in the start of this year, start of 2025, and we kind of brought together a group of our relevant sort of property colleagues to familiarize them the tool, get them understanding how it worked, and kind of we now have a system where we essentially meet every couple of weeks to talk about what the Emma tool is presenting us, and we'll give you some examples of what that looks like.
Before we go into that, can I just ask a question, actually? What was the decision making around Emma AI? So you'd obviously been doing lots of things. What sort of helped get you over the line to work with something like Emma AI?
I think it was actually on the last slide, the stuff I showed, I think demonstrating the successes that we'd already had and showing that there was a lot of kind of fat to trim ultimately in our energy use, made the case that there was a lot of savings to be made, and ultimately those savings were a lot more cost effective than the big, capital projects that I had on the slide before. And so I think we knew there was a case that we could make a lot of savings at potentially a lower cost.
But it was also to do with, the number crunching, the data and things
like that?
Well,
that's the other thing. It's actually, as I say, it was a lot of time for me and for some others to actually analyze this data. So we're hoping that Emma would take some of that work away, make it a lot easier for us, but also present new insights that we hadn't spotted. And I suppose the other driver is actually making it a lot quicker.
Yeah.
We had, I remember one example where we had one of our offices. I was just doing some checking of our data and spotted that we had a huge spike in energy use that had been going on for something like 6 months, and no one had spotted it. Just happened to pick it up by going through some reports. And it was thousands and thousands of pounds because, and I can't remember the detail, but basically something had been left on that shouldn't have been left on, like an air handling bit of kit or something like that. Really big user of energy, been left on in a building. Some don't know what caused it, but ultimately we fixed it, and it was thousands of pounds that we could have saved if we picked it up quicker. So part of the driver was using MAI to make that ultimately put our energy data in front of us much more quickly, so we could make those decisions quicker, and make the efficiencies quicker as well.
Okay, cool.
So I will now hand over to Jon to talk about sort of how the tool works and what it shows us.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Yeah. So the goal here was, as Peter's explained, was to detect what we call overage, so potential wasted energy, and then to notify the site, which we haven't mentioned actually so far. So I'll cover some of that. The graphic on the left there is a classic half-hourly trace. The green line is automatically calculated benchmark that the software calculates. So for any given building, or indeed for any given data point within that building, it will calculate a benchmark automatically, and it will look to decide whether you're operating as well as you can do. So just a point on that, it's worth saying a lot of the heavy lifting that Peter's team's done in terms of the more expensive CapEx projects, they're going to effectively aim to move that green line down. So you're going to aim to improve the overall ability of the building, but then you still have to operate the building well within that capability, and that's where we really kind of do most of our work. So the yellow tabs on the left there are where the platform automatically detected potential waste. And you'll see that improved from the 8th onwards. The building was back down to baseline. So that in a very high level is what Emma does continuously on every single data point that it can access. On the right is a notification. So as Peter said, these are quite big, complex buildings. Most of our notifications to Cambridge University Press go to facilities team people who can actually take action. In the smaller sites that the CUP have, we can go directly to either an energy champion or a key holder at that site, and they may be able to do something directly themselves. So where there are small residential units or other areas where people can affect change directly, then we can send them this alert automatically, and it's all fully automatic. So the key thing here is everything in that outbound is driven by the software, and even when the individual replies, that's processed by the software as well. So we're able to learn and understand what they have done or haven't been able to do, and for the facilities team, they're able to therefore keep a track on all of that as well.
Jon, can I just take us back slightly? So obviously These are some of the results that you're seeing, but what did you actually have to do physically first of all? So you're connecting something, you're connecting MRAI up to something. Can you just talk us through that little bit of the journey, just what you're actually having to do so you can then start seeing this stuff through MRAI?
Yeah, so there are a couple of slides later
on.
Right,
you're going to do it later. That's perfect.
But well, on the more complex side of it, but Peter alluded to the very first step that we always work on is gathering data from what we call the fiscal meters or the billing meters on the front of the site. In Cambridge University Press's case, there was a number of very big supplies for some of these buildings, but there are in a lot of the cases there are more than one supply for redundancy reasons and other reasons. So there are actually a number of data points that are already available on the billing side before you do anything, before you spend any capex at all. That work can seem like initially it's a bit tricky for people, but it's actually, once it's running, it's fully automatic. So we had to go through the process of signing some LOAs, letters of authority, which allowed us to access Cambridge's data. We then load that data into the platform on an ongoing basis, and that starts to produce these sorts of charts. So it's always the first place to start, and it gives you very quickly an idea of the rhythms of these buildings and where you might have opportunities for the sort of more advanced work that Peter mentioned, such as BMS integration and sub-metering, etc.
And that was a question I was going to ask later on, but we'll go. That's good that you mentioned it. We'll come on to that later. Cool.
Okay. Yeah. So just going a little bit further, and perhaps to the point you just mentioned. So this black trace here is exactly what we just said about that primary data coming in from the fiscal meter. If you look on the left, the kilowatt hours here, it's peaking at nearly 360 per half hour. So this is a substantial supply. This is one of the big main buildings that CUP operate out of in Cambridge. So this would be the first thing you would see if you connected up your data just from your billing meters before you do anything else, before you spend anything on integrations to anything else. This data is available to you freely. Everybody owns their data. and can access it directly from either DCDAs or energy suppliers. And we worked with Cambridge to get that done. So you can sell some things straight away. You can see the rhythm of the 5 days in the week across the pattern there. You can see these strange dips on the weekends. They're much more prominent on the weekends, but they are actually also there during the day. That's the solar that's on the Cambridge sites, and you can see how it's almost driving you to zero consumption at points over the weekend. So that again tells you, okay, now you've got something interesting there. You'd ideally like to remove that solar from the trace, because then you can get at the consumption. So you can, these are the sorts of things we were learning in the early weeks about what we needed to do. The blue in the background, just for reference, is temperature, ambient air temperature. And that can be very helpful to understand the types of energy use you've got, because heating related or air cooling related energy use will tend to react to those temperatures externally. By the way, that is a screenshot directly from the live software, so you can kind of see how the software looks when you log into it. Another view of the software, this one is predominantly used by facilities teams people, but this is auto-detected issues across the estate and value assigned to them. So where facilities do come into the software and looking for things that they can actually take action on, this is one of the ways they can view that. We find actually most of the work is done by people on receipt of notification when it's material, but these screens are available and do show you the sorts of monetary value that you could be potentially looking at. And I mentioned the notification earlier, so I just thought we'd highlight this. What we found, and this is perhaps learning from years of doing this now, is what we're really trying to do in most cases is drive behavioral change. And we found that driving behavioral change is helped hugely by proving we're actually measuring something. And so here, we're not intending any end user to understand that graph, but if you can just see there that on the 25th of April, that there has been a substantial clear uplift in the overnight usage. That alone is normally enough for people at the site or the facilities people to go, okay, that's not normal, let's go investigate. And Peter mentioned a great example where something was picked up after months. We're looking to try and catch this in days, ideally immediately the next day, if it's very materially out of step. So you shouldn't have situations where things are running for weeks on end without them being spotted. The platform should pick it up very quickly.
So is it also possible to use this information to sort of just have a much better understanding of what's happening in the buildings as well?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways that you can look at that. So I guess what Peter was saying before about the manual work that energy managers do across an estate is often looking for where the problems potentially are, and Emma's essentially doing that for you. So what you're left with is a list of the best performing sites and then the worst performing sites, and that worst performing list also has the change from previous weeks. And that's often the quickest way to detect problems where there's been some sort of variance out of the norm. And we even get it with changes in personnel, because sometimes buildings have this, people understand how they work and understand the rhythms of the building. And if you have a change of personnel, some of that knowledge can be lost. So you'll find situations where a building will drop within the list, and Emma will detect that. And then you can perhaps go and start to address what's happened in that scenario.
What happened here, by the way, in terms of the do you actually know? Is this a very specific example?
Yeah, this is a specific example. So I suppose there's a couple of things to notice in this. So those spikes that you're seeing in the overnights on the 19th, 20th, 22nd, a classical kind of simple line where you said if you go over a line, then alert. You'd have probably alerted on those.
Yeah.
But we don't alert on those. The software doesn't alert on those because it sees them as recurring artifacts. They're probably immersion heaters going on or some sort of purging going on overnight. You might want to investigate that kind of thing. But what we're really looking for with this software is to try and alert the real step up problems. And that one on the 25th, if you look at it, when I've looked at a lot of these traces, you start to recognize things. It's relatively flat, which means it's probably not heating related. And if you look at the amount of kilowatts involved on the left, it's about 0.8, 0.7-ish a step up. So you maybe even slightly less. So you're looking at very likely that's something electronic that's been left on. So whether it be banks of lighting or banks of screens or something else. And if you look in the where the little light bulb is towards the top there, it says that we've noticed you potentially left lighting or TV screens on. Now, I think in this case, it was actually a bank of lighting that had been left on in one area. So when we receive that reply, that will be fingerprinted as being a specific lighting bank that somebody's said has been left on. And there's a good chance that if it occurs in the future, we'll actually be able to tell them directly what it was that was left on.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Peter, do you want to handle this?
Yeah. So hopefully this might give some sense for some of the actual things we've identified. And I think John, you just mentioned sort of like changes in staff, and I think this first one is a good example of that. So we have one of our offices, actually the one I'm in right now, is it was a warehouse and has been converted into a office space. So it's not really designed as an office space and has kind of been retrofitted. And we essentially have like one air handling system that serves the whole of a big office space. We always knew it wasn't great for sort of not just energy use, but also sort of thermal comfort. We had a lot of staff complaints of people being cold or hot sometimes at the same time. And what Emma helped us identify, so I think this is the picture in the top right, is just the meter for the air handling units. We saw that we saw these huge spikes. So that, one day it would go up huge, ultimately running flat out for an hour or two and then turning off, and then running flat out for an hour or two and then turning off. And from sort of speaking to our colleagues in the property team about this, trying to understand what was causing this, ultimately what we found out was the facilities team, the air handling system wasn't very good at maintaining a constant temperature. So if they had it on, it would just get really, really cold. If they had it off, it would get really, really hot, depending on the season. So they'd kind of, over the years, they'd kind of settled on this, well, let's just have it on for a couple of hours, get the temperature right, then we'll turn it off so people don't get too cold, and then repeat the schedule over the course of the day. So they'd kind of found this way of going, well, this is kind of the best way we can find of managing the limitations of the system. Sort of always been slightly, aware of that issue, but what Emma has helped us do actually is put a cost on it. So we now know it's costing about £5,000 a year by kind of running this system in this very inefficient way. Ideally, we want a nice smooth curve of the system gradually ramping up as the day gets warmer or colder, depending on the season, and then tailing off towards the end of the day, and ideally being switched off, out of office hours. So ultimately, what this has led to us doing is we're now looking at making some improvements to the controls of the air handling unit so it can respond to temperatures in the space rather than just being this very brute force on off throughout the day. So that was one of the really useful and probably one of the bigger insights that we got from the tool right off the bat. I think it was one of the first things we spotted when we started getting the data through. The second one I think we'll actually cover in a bit more detail on the next slide. So in one of our other offices, we spotted that the chillers on a roof were using a lot of energy outside of hours. So I think we'll show that on the next slide. The last one was a fairly simple one. So I think this is one of our kind of events spaces. We had essentially the time clocks on the air conditioning units had just been set incorrectly, so they were running at full blast outside of hours. So it was a really quick, simple fix, and ultimately all it needed was one of our facilities technicians to go out, fix that. No one had spotted it, but yeah, the AC time clocks had been set wrong, and they were running out of hours ultimately.
That's just mad. That's just mad.
Exactly, yeah. And it's those sorts of, potentially we might have spotted it. We have done some manual going around and checking time clocks, but people fiddle with controls all the time. So this gives us that really instant feedback of, okay, something's changed here. We can go and fix it.
Before, could we just go? Sorry. Actually, stay on this slide for the moment. A question from Vanessa. So thank you, Vanessa. And this is probably John, but it might be you as well, Peter. How much time do you have to spend setting levels and parameters in the software or the AI? Because obviously you get these great results, but you've got to set it all up. So, I mean, are we looking at months? Are we looking at days? How long are we looking at, John?
Well, in terms of levels, you don't. That's I guess one of the key things. I've worked with a number of energy managers and I've been driven crazy by people saying to them, "You're sending me too many alerts. Can you change my level?" and what have you. So you don't actually set the levels; the system sets them for you. And we're also pretty tight on how often we alert, so you'll never get more than 2 a week, and that's predicated on the value as well. So yeah, in terms of setting up, I think you have to get through the pain of the processing of the data from your energy supplier and/or from the DCDA.
Right.
The industry is getting much better at that. I will say we have agreement now with all of the major DCDAs, and we can automatically move most people if they're on a DCDA over to receive data. Sorry, our systems can receive data directly, so that it is getting easier. But you do have to go through that sort of signing some LOAs, and we potentially have to work with an energy supplier.
Okay.
But no, you won't set any levels. They're all calculated by the software.
Okay. But so look, let's say it takes weeks for that operation to get the data to go into MRAI. Then what setting are you setting any parameters, or are you basically saying, right, MRAI, look at this, start telling?
I think the key difference in the approach is that the whole aim was to automate everything. So what Peter's saying about that top right hand graph, that was immediate on load. Essentially, you look at the data on load just to start to have a look through, see what the system detected and found, and the very first thing you spot is what's that kind of thing. And there'll be other ones where there'll be perhaps things have been left on for weeks on end. We've seen that with other sites outside Cambridge where things have been left on, and there'll be value that Emma will detect immediately. So one thing that I think we did with your data very early on, Peter, was that the first thing that's very useful is to actually load a year's worth of data into the platform for all sites.
Yeah.
And so that's normally where we start, because the platform will then take that year's worth of data and it will do two things. Number one is it will learn the rhythm of the buildings and set all the parameters automatically. But the second thing is it will give you an immediate readout of what the possible savings would have been had it been running last year, for example. And so that's when you can immediately start to spot some of these really kind of glaring overruns, because you're able to say, why is there £6,000 of value on that site? And when you look into it, you can immediately spot some of the stuff that's gone wrong.
And actually, say that if I could just jump in, the loading back the year's data, that helped us, going back to your question earlier about sort of making the case. That helped us because we ultimately ran as a trial for a few months to start with. We said, right, let's throw in a year's data, see what it tells us, and that kind of gave us validation that there's a lot here. There's a lot of things it's already identified.
Wow.
So we've sort of taken it from there ultimately.
Oh, okay. So so just load in the system. It can start going. It can almost go, right, I think you're using X, and I think it's not an I. I'm anthologizing. Sorry, I'm making a person out of MRAI. But effectively, the system can say, actually, you're probably wasting energy by 8 to 12% or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that screen which John showed of the sort of big list of potential savings. From what I remember, we immediately had a big long list of things to get stuck into. So yeah, definitely there was a lot to go at.
Okay, and again, we'll come on to the next slide. But you mentioned a trial, so it was almost like a pilot. Well, you did it for across all the sites, didn't you? So you actually took a decision. We won't do it for one site. We'll do it for all sites just to see the potential.
Yeah, so we've done it as pilot, and we started off with focusing on our biggest energy users. So I mentioned at the start, we've got quite a few small, pretty tiny locations. For now, we haven't pulled them in. We may do in the future, but I think we wanted to really focus effort on the places where we knew we would have the biggest return. So yeah, in this kind of initial phase, we're focused on our biggest users.
Okay. Now you talked about this BMS monitoring, and I'm sure there'll be some questions about integration, etc. Why don't we go on to that next slide?
Yeah,
it's probably worth me saying on the data load, just to mention. So Peter's talking about a very few set of residential units that we haven't pulled in, primarily because the meters are not up to standard for the data. Right. The analogy I always use with this is when it comes to pilots and trialing is, when you're looking for needles, in haystacks, you want the entire haystack. And the reason that's it's the wrong way around to say let's try it on one building, because the machine doesn't sweat the data, right? Basically, you want to throw all the data in the machine, and then it can find all of the problems across the estate almost instantaneously.
Wow.
And what you don't want to do is try it on one building and then try it on the next building, because it's just a big waste of your time, really.
Oh, okay. So it's actually worth. I'm trying to think of an analogy, but it's almost like, take the big drop of medicine rather than having it drip fed.
Yeah, and just because there's no stress, once you've got that LOA and data flow in place, you can actually process the entirety of your power consumption, gas and electric, and you can process it for the entire year straight away. And so then you can start to say, okay, as Peter said, let's focus where we can get the most benefit. But you don't know where that benefit is until you've processed the entire lot.
Okay.
And that's a really good point, actually. I suppose some of our smaller sites, well, as you say, the metering's not quite set up for it yet. But with our big sites, we have people on site all the time. A lot of our really small sites, we don't have a presence 24/7. Right. So potentially MAI is almost more beneficial. And mostly they don't use as much energy, but there may be even bigger savings proportional to their use, because there's no one on site to monitor, whether the lights are left on.
Yeah. Okay. Right, I'll let you get into this chiller before and after scenario.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about this one?
I can talk about it if you want. Yeah. It's so Peter's already alluded to this one. It was on his previous slide, but I thought it was worth showing the actual data that drove this. So the top slide or the top graphic is the initial run of the data from that year backlog or year back of data that we brought into the platform. All of those yellow tabs there are all automatic markers the software's applied where it didn't really like the look of what it was seeing. And he thought, based on temperature correlations and also some periods of past performance, that there was something going on that wasn't quite right. If you actually look right at the start of that trace, around the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, you see relatively sharp edges to the trace, and that's the AC or chiller unit shutting down quite well at the end of the day. As you come through the trace in June, you see it gets very erratic, and there's a lot of noise in the signal. There's some very high peaks, etc. So the software didn't think that things were really running correctly, but it's an advisory at this stage, so it may be correct. It's possible. But what happened is that was taken through the facilities team on your side, I believe, Peter, right?
Yeah.
And they went out and actually did some analysis themselves, and they decided that absolutely the timer settings on the chillers were clearly not right. On some other parameters, I believe. I'm no chiller expert, but anyway, if you look at the trace on the bottom, you can see a vastly improved cleaning up of the trace with very sharp edges at the ends of the day. And the total value on that one was around 8,000 per annum.
It's really interesting. Talk about pictures saying 1,000 words, but actually that second picture underneath really does show the massive difference just in terms of the leveling on those bottom spikes, but then also just the level of the peaks are just not as high as well. So I can see why that's worked so well. And when we talk about chiller, what are we talking about? A chilling unit for a building or a chiller for a fridge?
Exactly. Yeah, the chiller, main sort of chiller for one of our offices. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Brilliant. Okay. John, there's a question coming in, and you may want to save this to later, but how can organizations get this Emma software? I think talk to John is probably the answer he'll want to give.
Yeah. Well, sure. Talk to me. The way we approach this, by the way, is the first thing we do is always work with you to analyze the data before anything commercial discussion of any sort. So it has to be worth your while, and therefore worth our while. So I'll work with anybody on that. We work with small schools on it. We run it for charities for free. We'll run the data for you without cost to first of all understand whether it's worth your while. And that Peter went through all that process with his team. And I think it's essential, whether it's going to build a business case or suggest to you that you perhaps want to do something else. Running the data first is the way forward.
That sounds remarkably altruistic of Optimal, John. Well, what the hell's going on? I think we were trying to sell something here.
it's because of what I said before. There's the thing is, if I had to sit down and apply people to analyze it in spreadsheets, I couldn't do it, right? But the fact that we can actually get the data and push it into a machine, the engineers are going to tell me it's not pain free, but it looks pain free to me when I ask them to do it.
It's pain free for Peter as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
For me, it's super easy, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff that seems to go on behind the scenes. So yeah,
I'm gonna right. So Leah that asked that question's asked another question. Can MRAI also be utilized in homes? How would that look like? Now, it strikes me if it's a very big home, then a super rich person might get something out of it. Or I'm going to ask from a housing association point of view, John, because obviously housing associations, in the end, they're passing the building over. But this may be an opportunity to look at helping their residents, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a very small site, then one of our resellers is probably a better place to start, because they're going to be able to give you the software for, if it's just 1 or 2 meters, you probably don't need me. You probably need one of our resellers who will also then be able to work with you on other things that we don't do. Such as, I mean, Peter's mentioned all sorts of things that his team have done. We don't do any of those, right? We don't put PV in or replace boilers or do anything like that. So there's all sorts of things that, if you've just got one small site, that you might want to talk with a different type of team about. And we have resellers of our software. But if you've got a housing association, then absolutely, we're actually talking to a couple of those already, where if you've got any number of meters, 10, 20, 30, 40, or even different data points within large buildings, well, then the software can do a lot of work for you that otherwise is going to be left to you in spreadsheets.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, say, just from kind of the usability perspective, we already had systems that we can get access to our meter data through our kind of utility brokers and like our BMS. We can download reports, we can see reports.
Yeah.
But actually, we've found, for me now, MAI is kind of my go-to portal to look at and download our energy data, because it has it all in one place, and there's kind of a drop-down menu. I can pick the sites, so I can imagine for someone who does have a big portfolio of lots of similar properties, you could just go and pick the site that you want to look at, and kind of look at their energy use.
Can I add, and BMS people will hate me for this, but I mean, you have a BMS, and I'm sure there's some sort of integration, but John, do you need a BMS, or can you effectively not need it with you've got?
BMS is the investment in the BMS is probably very important as your building gets to a certain size. Right. But we operate on vast numbers of sites where there's no BMSs installed. So we operate with people like William Hill and Holland and Barrett and Marsden's. As of a few weeks ago, we're now national with them, and those sites in the main don't have BMSs because it's not worth the investment in all the control layers. If you're at Peter's scale, where you've got huge buildings with very, very complex systems, you're absolutely going to have a BMS.
Yeah.
But I think you're talking about different roles, really. The BMS is extremely good at managing what is a very complex mechanical, electrical environment. What we're looking to do is to sort of run across the top of that and check, one, whether all that's working as well as it could possibly do, and whether the power consumption is as low as it could possibly be, but then also pick up all this behavioral stuff that the BMS can do very little about. So if you've got things in there that humans turn on and off and plug in and plug out and do things like that, then the BMS isn't really going to be able to control those.
Okay. Paulina's got in touch. She's from quite a large hotel corporation. So thank you, Paulina. Are we able to share the slides? We're quite happy to share the slides. They've been our public domain, but also she's very keen to talk to you anyway, John. So Paulina will make sure John gets in touch with you, and I'm assuming that we can share the slides. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll just have to check. I'm pretty sure we can share them. I'll just check how we clean them of notes and stuff. But yeah, happy with that.
Okay, that might be, okay. Yeah, don't give away any of the crown jewels.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, I should let you carry on. Right, so we've got about 15 minutes left, if that. So why don't we move on to the next slide?
And yeah, John, do you want to talk about this one as well?
Yeah, I'll cover this one quickly. So this one comes right back to the conversation about where data comes from. So the first port of call that we for everything we went through, as Peter explained, was first of all getting the data from the.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, I seem to have lost John as well.
Yeah, I've seemed to have lost John. Right, Peter, take over.
Yeah, okay.
Disappeared.
Yeah, well, I'll try and cover this one. I mean, essentially, the picture on the left, we already had some sub metering in one of our buildings. It had been set up years ago, and we'd actually let the system that reported that data, we'd actually let it lapse because we weren't really looking at or using the data. And I think part of that is that we hadn't, now that we're getting the insights from AI, we can actually do stuff with the data, whereas previously we just had a system that was generating reports that sat there in a cloud somewhere that no one was looking at. So I think these meters are now come back into use, and we were able to use them for MAI tool when we weren't
Do you
using
know
them
what? I'm pleased, John. Don't take this the wrong way. You glitched out there, so I got Peter to take over. But I think interestingly, he's coming at it from a business point of view, and actually, what he's saying is that these sub meters have now become much more important. They weren't using them particularly, but MRAI has now enabled them to utilize the information that's coming out of that. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I mean, that's so. I heard the end of what Peter said, and I thought he's just said it better than I could have done.
Yeah, fine. There we go. Right.
The
You
problem,
can go now, John. You're
no, the problem with actually being an engineer is you forget and start being an engineer, don't you? So,
I have got a question actually. So obviously MRAI, it's highlighting. So Peter, your team can go out, do what it needs to necessarily. But is it possible for then things like auto switch offs or being able to do that, or would you prefer not to take that control?
From MAI, as in MAI having control over systems?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's something to think about in the future. At the moment, obviously, it can't. It's relying on us taking the information and acting on it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to give AI that level of control. It's a bit scary to me.
It's totally correct time, isn't it?
I will say on that one, we absolutely don't take control because that's actually the job of BMS systems and other things. So it comes with all its own pains, and so we kind of leave that world to the guys that want to run control layers.
Okay.
And we focus on checking power consumption and looking to try and drive behavioural change.
Yeah, okay. That's such a diplomatic answer, John. Sorry, everyone. I'm enjoying this too much. By the way, this has been great. By the way, the level of detail, etc., has been fantastic. So thank you. I'll thank you at the end again, but I think it's been really useful.
Is there anything else you want to say on this one, John?
Yeah, I mean, so Peter mentioned that I think the key thing with this is that this sub-metering was already in place, but it wasn't being used at all. There's actually an RJ45 cable plugged into that bank of meters on the left, but nobody even knew where it went. And Peter certainly wasn't getting this data previously. So it just showed that there's actually a lot of assets that you can very quickly and cheaply light up. We did have to put a small amount of kit in, but very small amounts of kit compared to the amount of data that's now flowing off it. So now that building has something like 40 data points, whereas before it had 2 for the primary incomers. There are now a couple of instances where some additional sub-metering is going to go in, where I think you're subletting the building further, Peter. Is that the intention?
Yeah. So we're adding some more metering on this site because we've got some tenants that have moved in the last year or two. We want to be able to monitor their use. We weren't able to do that. And I think also, John, it's fair to say you have kind of a billing module that you can add to the tool if we want to make use of that. So we're looking at that at the moment. Okay,
that's interesting because obviously, like you said, I know bill validation, even in these days, is still a thing that people do. Also, in terms of the business model, John, is there just like a set fee for MRAI, or is it based on per meters, whatever? Because obviously you're now talking about all these sub meters, and people think, oh, does that cost me more or not?
No, we're flat fee. We're flat fee per building, and the rationale behind that is actually if we do sub metering, it's to improve how the software can help the client within the building.
Right.
So we're not looking to charge additional for the data flows off those sub meters. We're really the sub metering equipment, if we put it in, because we'll also take integrations with BMS's and anybody else's data. But if we put in the equipment to bring the data back off sub meters or install sub meters, then obviously that's charged for. But there's no change to the software license. It's hopefully it'll improve your ability to drive savings.
Okay, cool. Right. Oh yes, we're nearly finished actually, which is great. Well done.
Yeah, I'll just try and sort of bring things towards a close with a bit of a talk about challenges. So talked about all the great things. I guess we already touched on this already. One of the challenges is kind of that, the value or return on investment for integrating smaller sites. We're still thinking about it, but as I said earlier, at the moment we're just focused on our biggest consumers. I think one of the challenges is lack of granularity on some sites. So there's a little screenshot from one of our sites where we literally just have like 1 or 2 meters. And sort of speaking to property colleagues, when we see the reports, sometimes it's difficult if we're not getting really good granularity. We see a big spike and we say, well, we don't know where in the building that happened. So definitely sub-metering helps to make the findings from MRA more useful. But the flip side of that is excess granularity on some sites. So that's a screenshot from our sort of one of our head offices where we have, I can't remember the number, but hundreds and hundreds of sub-meters. And it's great, we can get really good insights, but actually it's almost overwhelming at some points. We have, does anyone know why we had a spike on the 3rd floor west wing last Tuesday? No idea. No one knows. So there comes a point where you kind of have to draw a line and go, let's just focus. You do have to focus in a little bit. Also, I suppose the other challenge there with that huge number of meters is it took us quite a lot of time to actually work out naming, because obviously we want in MAI, we want to be able to look up a meter and say, okay, yeah, that is the 3rd floor west wing or whatever. But quite often our metering was tied to distribution boards. So we're relying on the knowledge of property colleagues to go, yeah, okay, well, we know that distribution board is that area, and we are having to provide a big long list to help the data going into MAI be a bit more useful. So that's just worth mentioning. And so I just talked about that. The kind of the naming and labeling of metering is really important because it helps make the findings more useful. I think John just touched on this briefly, but we do see some impact of solar on our half hourly. So we'll see sometimes it's hidden if you don't have enough sub-metering, or if you can't separate the solar. That kind of dip in the middle of the day will appear every day when the sun's shining, but not on the days when the sun's not shining. So it can be quite, it can just interfere with the overall trend, which makes things a bit tricky. Oh, and here we go. Energy efficiency in action. The lights have just gone off in this building. Obviously not been moving around enough. Staff resource and knowledge. I mean, I think, I'm really lucky we've got a supportive property team sort of working with me on this. But it is a time input for them to go and chase down some of these findings. And for some of them where they're quite small, if it's 20 quid, they're not going to send a facilities technician running around buildings to try and find the one light that's been left on. So there is a bit of a judgment of sort of, how much time and effort you put into some of the findings. And I guess when I say staff knowledge, it's not technical knowledge. It's also just that thing of, again, we'll see a spike last Tuesday. Does anyone know, was there a big event? What was going on? There's a limitation to knowledge, and it helps to have a broad range of people involved in the discussion. So we try and have a few different property people involved in these meetings. So they've got good understanding of what was going on in the building. And I think we have to say, sustainability of AI is a consideration for us as an organisation. We're looking at the moment. I talked at the start of the presentation about Scope 3. We know that our tech-related emissions are potentially quite significant. We're still working to understand them, but our sort of technology and cloud hosting emissions are quite big. And there's a lot of articles at the moment of the impact of AI. We're very conscious of that. This is AI helping us reduce energy and reduce emissions, but you do have to be aware that every time we're using technology, there is an impact to it, and there is some. So we did have some initial conversations when we were setting up, and John was helpful in giving us a bit of information about, where they're hosting, so we can kind of answer some of those questions. I mean, ultimately, the MAI tool compared to our whole business-wide cloud hosting and all of our bigger systems is a drop in the ocean, I think, for our digital impact. But again, can't be ignored, and it's something to keep on the agenda. And then just sort of what's next. So we're still working on integrating the BMS in our warehouses. This is an issue at our end rather than with John and the team. We've had some issues getting our BMS reporting data. We had a big upgrade last year, and it's led to some issues, which has meant we haven't been able to bring our warehouses into the system, unfortunately. So we're hoping to bring them in. We talked already about the fact we're installing some more sub-metering in areas where we've identified a need. We're also looking at adding footfall data. So we already can sense check the data with the temperature, but we think it will be helpful to have footfall because, again, post-COVID, you see really, high peaks of people coming to the office on certain days and maybe not on a Monday or a Friday or whatever it might be. So that can affect the ability to sort of understand the trends. So we do have some footfall data of sort of staff badging into the office, and we can potentially aggregate that and get that into the tool to help us understand, okay, there was a big event last week. We had 100 people on site who weren't the week before, and that's the reason for the spike. So we're looking into that. The other thing we're looking at is actually trialing MAI in a non-UK office. So we've just, I think it's in the post as we speak, we've got a meter going to our Singapore office where we're hoping to trial it and see how we can get things as a bit of a trial outside the UK. So that is sort of next on the agenda, I think.
Wow,
that was all.
Yeah, well, I was going to say we've been taking.
I'm going to quickly stand up and try and get the lights to turn back on.
That's brilliant. I love to see energy. Hey, energy efficiency live. It's brilliant. So thank you for that. That's very good, Peter. And thank you very much for a very comprehensive and detailed. We've been taking questions as we go along. I'll give the audience another sort of minute or so if there's any burning questions, but we're nearly up on our time anyway. My big thanks to both Peter and Jon. That was really, really, that was warts and all. So thank you, Peter. And not, it's useful to see some of the issues that are around this as well. So I know we're talking about success, but it's also about the, some of the issues that you had to go through and the challenges. Please, if you're still watching, please rate this webinar. I think it's been fantastic. We've got lots of information out. Jon will be in touch afterwards. There's a couple of people that definitely want to talk to you. Peter, I might well get you on Scope 3 one day. That'd be great. You probably that won't be such an easy topic, I don't think. So I'll let Peter and Jon both say their goodbyes.
Yep. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thank you very much.
And Peter, thank you very much for showing that energy efficiency is live and kicking at Cambridge University Preston Assessment by sitting there so quietly that it actually turned everything off. That was marvellous. I'll just like to say this is going to be on demand within about 5 minutes. So if you want to come back and have a look at the slides, etc., or if you want the slides, just email in. We'll get those across to you. I think Peter just needs to check that there's no crown jewels that are going out. That's it. So we're going to say goodbye. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jon. That was very illuminating. Goodbye, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.